You're watching Tag TV. You're watching Tag TV.
Hello and welcome to Newsweek South Asia, a program that talks about breeding of terrorism and its impact on South Asian nations. Let's begin with the headlines first. India abrogates Article 370. Pakistan threatens India of another Pulwama-like attack in Kashmir. Deadly bomb blast targets Hazara in Quetta. Pakistan charges Hafiz Saeed only after US asked them to show progress against terror financing. And Taliban militants denounce Afghan elections and warn residents to stay away from rallies and gatherings. The government of India took a historic step of scrapping Article 370 from Indian Constitution this week. The move abolishes the special status of Jammu and Kashmir that it enjoyed since 1954. The historic step is expected to have a broader positive implication of curbing terrorism and separatist sentiments that have been stalked by Pakistan since the partition. A report. Article 370, the biggest hurdle in ending terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir, finally got discarded from the Indian Constitution this week. Even though the people of Jammu and Kashmir have welcomed the constitutional amendment, but Pakistan, as forced by its habit, is still sending infiltrators in the valley with an aim to incite violence in the region.
जी मोदी सरकार का ये ऐतिहासिक फैसला है जी बहुत बड़ा काम किया ये मोदी सरकार ने और 370 और 35 ये खत्म करके एक देश को एक ऐसा अनमोला तोहफा दे दिया है कि आप ये सोच भी नहीं सकते थे कभी भी उम्र भर।
जो धारा 370 और 35 से हटाया बहुत अच्छा किया है। कोई नया काम करने में थोड़ी दिक्कत होती है, हम दिक्कत फेस करने के लिए रेडी है।
Just a day following the abrogation of Article 370, the Indian security forces foiled a major infiltration attempt by a Pakistani border action team squad in Kiran sector of Kupwara district in Jammu and Kashmir along the border. About 5 to 7 soldiers and terrorists trying to infiltrate from across the border were killed by the Indian army. Experts say that ceasefire violations are often used as a cover for infiltration by Pakistan. With another attack in Kashmir, Pakistan could also find itself in the blacklist of FATF.
The very fact that they've crossed the line of control and the bodies are lying on our side of the line of control is enough evidence of the fact that they may have tried to intrude and it is not a plan. So obviously if they ask for these bodies now, they'll have to accept the fact that, well, they have crossed the fence which might affect the Financial Action Task Force's verdict also, might affect world opinion also. So perhaps they are hesitating. Hopefully they'll take their boys back.
Pakistan government barely leaves a chance to interfere in the internal issues of India, and this time again, it is trying its best to disrupt peace in Jammu and Kashmir by delivering hate speeches from across the border. Ignoring mass agreement by the people of Jammu and Kashmir on the removal of Article 370 from the Indian Constitution, Prime Minister Imran Khan, in his speech in the joint session of Pakistan Parliament, spoke viciously about the region and also indicated towards another Pulwama-like attack. The statement made by the Pakistani Prime Minister in the Parliament clearly means that the February 14th attack on Indian CRPF personnel was a well-fabricated plan whose architects are still roaming freely in Pakistan and are well capable of planning another similar kind of attack in Kashmir.
पुलवामा टाइप इंसिडेंट होगा मैं आज पेशन कोई करता हूं।
The statement made by Prime Minister Imran Khan suggesting that there could be another Pulwama is both predictable at one level and also, I would say, characteristic of the kind of duplicity and hypocrisy that Pakistan engages in. when it comes to terrorism. Because specific to Pulwama, Prime Minister Imran Khan's statement has been very selective, because while talking about Pulwama, he has not made reference to the fact that at that time the Jaish-e-Mohammed had claimed responsibility for the Pulwama attack. And where does the Jaish-e-Mohammed get its support from? From within Pakistan. So today I think the global community is aware of Pakistan's own role in nurturing terrorism. So I'm afraid the Imran Khan reference to the possibility of another Pulwama, if it is supposed to be a veiled threat, I think India knows how to deal with such challenges. But on the other hand, I think perhaps he needs to also ponder over the fact that this kind of selective reference to an incident and trying to hide the fact that Pakistan had claimed responsibility, meaning the Jaish-e-Mohammed is the group operating from Pakistan, is in the public domain. So in this day and age, I don't think you can fool the people, whether in Pakistan or in India.
Pakistan has intensified its efforts at increasing the strength of terrorism in launchpads along the line of control over the past few days, and is consistently pushing infiltrators into Jammu and Kashmir to create havoc in the region. Imran Khan's inadvertent admission of Pakistan providing base to terror outfits expose its diabolic foreign policy, which aims at sabotaging the sovereignty of India. Moving on, while Pakistan is busy poking its nose in India's internal affairs, the terrorist group residing in the nation are enjoying a free hand and space to continue their killing spree in Balochistan. Pakistan's provincial capital Quetta witnessed third blast within a fortnight. The blast left more than 3 people killed and many injured. A report.
Over the years, Pakistan-backed terrorism has risen sharply in Balochistan region. The biggest example being the latest triple bomb blast that took place within a span of 15 days, claiming more than a dozen lives in Quetta. In the latest blast, the bomb went off in a market located on Mission Road, where most of the shops are owned by members of the Hazara community. Hazaras have been living in Pakistan before partition since 1880s. The minority community has been the target of persecution and violence both from the Pakistan army and the terrorists.
Pakistan has created different militant organizations to deal with different minorities groups. For example, Lashkar-e-Jhangvi or Sipah Sahaba, these are the groups, which are mainly targeting Shia minorities. Then there are groups, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is targeting non-Muslims, like the Hindu minority or the Sikh minorities, Christian minorities. So there are different groups which are dealing with different minorities, and all these groups are being trained, funded by the Pakistani military establishment.
Pakistani forces have intensified their operations in Balochistan since the very beginning of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Pakistan's deep state have conducted several hundred military operations and abducted thousands of people in Baloch region. The abductions have now turned into extreme cases of killings that take place by the veiled use of terror outfits who carry out bomb blasts in the region to suppress the voices of oppressed Baloch citizens.
Yielded against international pressure, Pakistan has finally charged the UN proscribed terrorist Hafiz Saeed for terror financing under Anti-Terrorism Act. The ostensible move came as a US delegation was on a visit to Islamabad to carry out an independent assessment on progress made by Pakistan in terror funding cases. A report.
After years of patronizing UN proscribed terrorist Hafiz Saeed, Pakistan has finally budged against international pressure to tighten its noose around the Lashkar-e-Taiba chief. Pakistan court has found him guilty in the terror financing case lately and charged him under the Anti-Terrorism Act. 26/11 Mumbai terror attack mastermind and the chief of Jamaat-ud-Dawa, Saeed was arrested by Pakistan's counter-terrorism department on July 17 in connection with charges relating to terror financing. India blames Saeed for masterminding the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, in which 166 people were killed, including several Americans. Saeed was declared a global terrorist by UNSC recently after a long, protracted battle by India at the UN body, a move which was consistently blocked by China.
Pakistan is playing a double game as it usually does. It is again trying to run with the hare and hunt with the hounds, trying to show the Western powers that he's doing enough against Hafiz Saeed. But the biggest irony is that whenever his case comes up for hearing, they don't produce the evidence that has been given to Pakistan authorities, especially by the Indians, by the Americans and everyone. And that is why a bounty of $10 million is on his head by the Americans. Now, one thing has to be very clear. Pakistan is not going to put this man inside for very long. A maximum that he'll get for terror financing is a year or maybe 6 months, and then he'll be free again to run his empire of militants that he's doing there.
The mounting international pressure on Pakistan to take steps against its homegrown terror outfits further led to a US delegation visiting Islamabad to have an independent assessment on progress made by Pakistan in terror funding cases. In June this year, the FATF had declared Pakistan a failed nation to complete its action plan on terror financing. It further warned Islamabad to meet its commitment by October, or the country could possibly be put under the Financial Action Task Force blacklist. Wary of featuring in the FATF blacklist, Pakistan in quick succession charged Hafiz Saeed under the Anti-Terrorism Act.
Pakistan was supposed to take action on 27 points, which included action against Hafiz Saeed, Lakfi, Masood Azhar, as well as terror financing, money laundering, etc., Hawala. But out of the 27 points that were listed out by the FATF, Pakistan has acted only on 2. They have not acted on 25. So in the last meeting that was held in the United States, Pakistan has been categorically told that if it wants to be out of that list, it has to take action against those points. In October, the final meeting will take place in Paris, where it is likely that Pakistan is to be transferred from the grey list to blacklist. And should that happen, Pakistan's economic difficulties will increase by an order of magnitude.
However, Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, conceded during his visit to US just 2 weeks ago that his country still harbors close to 30,000 to 40,000 militants who have been trained and fought in some part of Afghanistan or Kashmir. Pakistan's quick step to charge Hafiz Saeed for terror financing after US delegation visited Islamabad to access the progress made by the country in curbing terror financing could rather be seen minimalistic against the intensity of terror activities the global terrorist has perpetrated across South Asian nations.
As campaigns for the upcoming presidential elections start in Afghanistan, the country is witnessing escalation in attacks from Taliban militants who have recently denounced the Afghan presidential polls, labeling it as sham. Taliban militants have also released a warning for the residents to stay away from rallies and gatherings, which could be targeted anytime. The warnings came as US and Taliban negotiators claim an excellent progress in peace talks. We have a report.
As Afghanistan continues to be mired in heightened terror attacks by Pakistan-backed Taliban insurgents, the Taliban denounces presidential elections in Afghanistan, calling it a sham that do not hold any value. Taliban in a statement also warned the public to avoid attending election campaign gatherings, as they had ordered the terror groups to target campaign rallies throughout the country to prevent the process of elections. This election process is nothing more than a ploy to deceive the common people for satisfying the ego of a limited number of sham politicians, the Taliban said in a statement. By seeking an expedited deal on US troop withdrawal and openly warning the residents of Afghanistan to stay away from election rallies, Taliban seems to focus more on cementing their position in the war-torn country. In the recent announcement, they called for a boycott of presidential elections and said Taliban fighters would do all they could to block the vote. To prevent losses from being incurred by our fellow compatriots, they must stay away from gatherings and rallies that could become potential targets, the militant said. Taliban has stepped up attacks in cities and civilian-populated areas lately as part of a move to block the presidential election rallies across the country.
حمله طالبان یا ادامه حملات طالبان بیانگر است که اونا به صلح تعهد ندارن با تاسف. هر حمله طالب باعث میشه که ما مانع را در پروسه صلح ببینیم.
To counter several terrorist attacks, the National Directorate of Security in Afghanistan had conducted 3 separate operations on Daesh terror outfit and other terrorist groups connected to Taliban insurgents. As a result of the operations, 2 operators of the Daesh suicide squad were killed and heavy weapons, bomb-making raw materials, suicide attack materials, explosives and self-made bombs were seized from the terrorists. In retaliation against the Afghan security forces, Taliban terrorists waged a heinous suicide attack on a police recruitment center in west of Kabul the same day.
برشی طرف پل سوخته می آمدیم بسیار یک صدای ترساور که امی موتر بخی لرزه کرد شیشه های دکان ها همه فرو ریخت. ما فقط این چای صبح رفتیم که داخل هتل باشیم چای صبح بخوریم. متاسفانه هم پیش شام شیشه بودیم که یک گرم پس خیز دیگه اطلاع پیدا نکردیم.
The suicide bomber detonated a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, killing 18 and injuring over 140. The series of attacks comes after US-based envoy Zalmai Khalilzad leading talks with the Taliban claimed excellent progress in peace process a few days ago. Resolute on their agenda of disrupting peace and waging attacks on civilians and security forces in Afghanistan, the Taliban do not seem to commit to any peace process. As presidential elections draw closer, the Afghan government is up against the challenge to counter Taliban terrorism and simultaneously hold voting in a peaceful manner.
Various officials from the United States are indicating towards growing threat from Pakistan-based terror group Al-Qaeda. The statements made by the 2 eminent officials from America suggest that the terror group Al-Qaeda is using dual policy of strengthening its might while simultaneously shifting the focus of counter-terrorism departments towards its offshoot, ISIS, a report.
Al-Qaeda and its affiliates remain as much of a threat to the US as it has ever been after the terrorist group rebuilt itself, while the US and other nations focused on destroying ISIS in Iraq and Syria, said a State Department official from America. Nathan Sales, the State Department's coordinator for counter-terrorism, said at a briefing in Washington that Al-Qaeda has been strategic and patient over the past several years. It has let ISIS absorb the brunt of the world's counter-terrorism efforts while patiently reconstituting itself. What the world is seeing today is an Al-Qaeda that is as strong as it has ever been.
Last year, the UN listed 11 ISIS-linked individuals at the so-called 1267 Committee. That's a good start, but these UN designations need to be implemented in individual countries. And that means we need more partners to adopt effective domestic designations regimes that allow them to sanction known terrorists. Fourth and finally, we need to deny ISIS the ability to radicalize the next generation of fighters. While the caliphate has been destroyed, ISIS's ability to inspire attacks persists because its ideology persists. We need to collectively refute the hateful, intolerant, and supremacist messaging that helped give rise to ISIS in the first place. Let me end with a final word on prosecutions. There's currently about 2,000 ISIS foreign fighters in SDF custody in Syria, and that's in addition to the Syrian and Iraqi citizens captured by the SDF. Let me be clear, these fighters are dangerous, battle-hardened terrorists. They left comfortable lives to go to the desert to fight for an idea, and they're still committed to that idea. We all have an obligation to keep them from ever returning to the battlefield.
From past few years, the US has shifted its focus on wiping out Islamic State's territorial holdings in Syria and Iraq after the terrorist group seized a swath of territory across both countries from 2014. Since then, the US and other nations are continuing to confront ISIS, which is an offshoot and rival of Al-Qaeda, as it expands its global franchisee and its message inspires other groups from Africa to the Philippines.
Pakistan has always sponsored terrorism, whether it was Al-Qaeda, which took part in 9/11 strikes in US, World Trade Center, whether it was in Mumbai, they have been always sponsoring terrorism. They have supported Al-Qaeda. Now, even now, when the American troops are wanting to pull out from Afghanistan, to some extent, dependency on Pakistan to mediate and get the Americans out and have a peaceful settlement so that Al-Qaeda and the Afghani government in power, they are able to coexist. Now, if that be so, then, and second is the Kashmir issue. Pakistan again is sponsoring terrorism. They have two theories. One is a good terrorist and one is a bad terrorist. A good terrorist is one who is operating in Kashmir. Today itself, Prime Minister Modi has said that in the last 30 years in Kashmir, 42,000 innocent lives have been lost. So that is a good terrorist for Pakistan. And anything which is happening in Balochistan or anywhere else against the interests of Pakistan, that is anything happening in favor of Pakistan is a good terrorist. And something like Balochistan is a bad terrorist. So, alignment of Pakistan with ISIS, with Al-Qaeda is quite obvious.
James Jeffrey, US envoy to the international coalition fighting ISIS, said that despite losing the once vast territory ISIS held in Syria and Iraq, the risk remained of attacks by underground cells and an expansion of the militants into new areas. The terror groups ISIS and Al-Qaeda remain a global threat, with the latter quietly rebuilding itself as the world focused on wrestling back territory seized by the former.
But what we have seen is a persistent, resilient, rural, terrorist level of violence generated by these underground cells of ISIS, particularly in the area south of, as you're looking at the map, Mosul and the Kurdish areas down to Iraq, down to Baghdad.
The US assessment of Al-Qaeda's strength runs counter to the general perception that the group was more isolated and under pressure since the killing of its founder Osama bin Laden in 2011. Last week, the US media reported that Osama bin Laden's son Hamza, considered a possible heir apparent to the Al-Qaeda leadership, was killed at some point in the past 2 years. Having considered all the threat reports coming from Al-Qaeda, the US State Department said that no one should mistake the period of relative silence from Al-Qaeda as an indication that they have gotten out of the business. They are very much in this fight, and we need to continue to take the fight to them.
And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Newsweek South Asia. We will be back next week with more news, views and analysis from the subcontinent. Meanwhile, do keep writing to us at nwsa@anin.com. This is Surbhi Sharma, signing off on the behalf of entire production team of Newsweek South Asia. Goodbye and take care.